Welcome to the Logosphere. I'm here as always with JD Roof.
Hello.
And I am Chris Stites. And we finally made it.
Finally. It's taken a little while.
It has.
We just upgraded our studio with nice new desks, so
Yeah.
hopefully this works out a little bit better.
Getting settled. Things are looking good, feeling good. But more than that, I was referring to the fact that we finally made it at the highly anticipated diabetes episode.
That's right. Yeah.
So this evening I'm going to talk to you a little bit about diabetes, a condition that you have, a disease that you have. And I think I'll just turn it over to you at this point to give me a little bit of an introduction, give us a little bit of introduction on how you came to have diabetes, what it is, what type you have, etc.
Okay. Yeah. So it's actually a crucial part of my story. Having it, what I have is not regular diabetes, which you see in most people that are diagnosed with diabetes. It's called juvenile type 1 diabetes. That's what they call it. That's the technical name. And I was diagnosed when I was 19, and I was in the United States Navy, and that was back in 2000.
Now, what's the difference between type 1 and type 2?
Type 1, okay, so type 2 is a disease. So they both have to do with insulin production, which is an enzyme that your pancreas produces, right? It secretes into your body, and that is designed for you to upload sugar into your system, to use sugar, to digest sugar, carbohydrates. And basically with a type 2 diabetic...
So, like, lactase is an enzyme that breaks down lactose, I believe.
Yeah, there you go. It's similar to that. So just think of insulin breaks down sugar. That's basically what it does. I mean, I'm not a medical doctor when it comes to that. I mean, I've had it for 20 years, so I know quite a bit about type 1 diabetes. But it is it's a chronic illness too. There's no cure known for it yet. And they do try to, like, I've heard a couple different versions of whether it's an autoimmune deficiency. Basically, the theory is my system went through some type of traumatic event, and my immune system attacked my pancreas, basically.
Did you answer what the difference between one and two is?
So type 2 is basically your pancreas is producing so much insulin for a long period of time, and it usually can fall into like the obesity realm. If somebody is overweight, obese, and they haven't really been taking care of themselves for 25 years, 30 years, your pancreas just keeps secreting the insulin, right? And the insulin will get trapped in your fat cells, right? And it doesn't get utilized. So basically, you start getting high blood sugars, and because the insulin that's being secreted by your body can't break it down, right? So your blood sugars, you have more sugar in your blood, and it's not digested and so properly. So basically, your pancreas just ends up overworking, and you get pre-diabetes first, which are like signs of high. You start getting higher blood sugars than the average person.
What are the signs?
Just a lot of it is vision. You got to think it's a very complicated disease, right? Because it has to do with your circulatory system as well. And so how things circulate in your in your hand, right? You have these small little capillaries, and if you have high blood sugars all the time, those places in your body, your feet, your eyes, wherever they have less circulation, you get neuropathy, you get retinopathy, which is, you can start losing your vision, you can start getting nerve damage.
Because the blood's not properly circulating through those parts of your body.
And so basically that's a telltale sign. Peeing a lot, like peeing more, like having to pee a lot, because basically what your body is doing is it can't handle what you're putting in, so it's just flushing everything out, kind of. Headaches, fatigue, there's a whole laundry list of pre-diabetic symptoms that happen, and then you can just check your blood sugar, and if your blood sugar is over 100, 120, then you're probably either walking towards diabetes. Now, there's another diabetes that happens with pregnant women, but that's a temporary thing. Their body is just under so much stress that it's like you're kind of like a temporary type 2 diabetic, and then as soon as they have the kid and get on a regular eating regimen, it goes away. So there is that. That would be considered kind of classified in the type 2 arena. A lot of type 2 diabetics, if they catch it early enough, they can reverse it with exercise and eating lower intakes of carbs and sugars. But it's a progressive illness. And I wouldn't say there's like a cure for it. There are medicines that type 2 diabetics can take orally that will help their body, like assist their body break down the sugar and help the pancreas out. But for the most part, you want to catch it early, and you want to get healthier. Basically, is your eating habits, your exercise, as soon as possible. Otherwise, it will eventually. What ends up happening with a type 2 diabetic that's long term is it progresses to a point where the pancreas just overworks, and then you become a type 1 diabetic like me. And so with my case, type 1 diabetes is something turned off my pancreas, basically. All the signs point at the immune system. The immune system looked at it as like an antibody, like when you get a cut or an infection or a disease, and it attacked and attacked and attacked, but it didn't get its teeth taken out, and it just kept going until it did permanent damage to my pancreas. And so that's kind of the theory. One idea that I think might have happened when I was in the service, I joined when the towers went down. I was a senior in high school, and immediately I joined a delayed entry program. And when you go overseas in the military, they give you these cocktails of vaccinations, right? Way more than you get when you're a kid. And a lot of this stuff is for different diseases in different countries. And if you're going to go overseas, you get these cocktails of different vaccinations kind of stacked in with each other. And they can overwhelm your system, right? And the military won't really pace them out because it's a time thing. They need these soldiers to get out to, Bahrain or the Middle East or, some duty station in an island somewhere. And they need to get it done quick. So you stand in a line, you just get hit with all these vaccinations. Now, when I got those vaccinations to go overseas, I blacked out a couple days later, and I was hospitalized right after the vaccination. So that could be the stressor.
With no explanation at the time.
With no explanation. They said it was sailor's crud, which is a mix of when you go to boot camp, you get people from all walks of life all over the place, and these germs kind of mutate right within the division you're living in. It's all close quarters, pretty much, bunk beds, stuff like that. And there's usually about 85 guys per barrack, and there's usually a nasty germ that goes around, depending on what boot camp. I went to the Navy one, so I think it was 8 weeks or something like that. It's a 8-week boot camp. So in that 8 weeks, you're going to get a nasty flu.
At some point,
usually. So they blamed it on that, right? They said, "Oh yeah, but I was hospitalized."
So
in boot
by
camp.
blacked out, you just went unconscious?
I went completely unconscious, and I woke up in a hospital.
Like, did you just kind of knock out standing up, or
yeah, I was
got
standing
lightheaded?
I was standing
Do you remember
at attention.
what happened?
Yeah, I was standing at attention, and it was a reveille call, which is like morning call, like wakey wakey, hands off snakey, is kind of a joke, right? Mm-hmm. And you get up and you stand at attention, and we did some exercise, or we cleaned out our sock drawers and got changed, and then you stand at attention and march a lot in the military. It's a lot of marching. It's what you practice, and my knees buckled and I passed out, and I was taken in a stretcher to the hospital I was in Chicago, Great Lakes, Illinois, which is the Navy boot camp area, and they just said, "Oh yeah, kid, you're hydrate. Here's some antibiotics. You'll be fine, right? Just get on out there again, right?" And I did recover. I was fine, and I continued, and I went into MA school, which was Master at Arms Training School, which was kind of like a military police type of thing, and passed that all with flying colors. The military actually was pretty easy for me. It wasn't that difficult. I was in pretty good shape, at that age, so I was like able to run a mile really fast and all that stuff, and used to a lot of physical exercise. So yeah, I went overseas. I was stationed in Kings Bay, Georgia first, and then I completed my school there, and then I went down to Puerto Rico, and that's where my duty station was, and didn't feel any different. It was like, okay, I'm good, right? And about a year and a half later, I started getting all the symptoms that I mentioned earlier. Like I started getting blurred vision. I was peeing a lot. I would have dreams when I was when I was sleeping. Especially if I would drink, like go out drinking with the guys. Like we'd go out to the bar because the drinking age down there was 18, so it was a lot of fun for military guys that were younger. And I was 18, so we'd go out to the bars and drink, and I'd get dehydrated drinking, which is so weird. It's so like counterintuitive because I'm peeing all the time. And I started having, I remember the first thing where I kind of thought something's wrong is I started dreaming of swimming in a pool of Gatorade. Like I would wake up covered in sweat, but like I wanted to be hydrated. It was this weird, like my body was lacking something, but I didn't know what. So I just kept drinking Gatorade or beer or water. It didn't matter what I drank, and it seemed to make it worse to the point where I think I peed my bed one day, right? And it was just the weirdest thing. It was like, what is going on? And so I started losing my vision more and more. It started getting blurry a lot, and I've always had 20/20 vision. And I'm trying to think of what other. I had lots of headaches, lots of fatigue. I started losing weight. That's another thing. That's a sign for a type 1 diabetic is I just started getting just any weight that I had, even muscle. Like I was going into this thing called DKA, which is where your body has malnutrition. So I'm eating all this food. I'm eating, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They feed you well in the Navy, right? And I'm hydrated, I'm drinking, I'm working, but I'm losing weight. It's really weird, right? And basically what's happening is the body can't process what you're eating, so it just flushes it out. And it's literally going after your muscles and digesting your muscles for just nutrition, just the basic needs of, walking around and, running or doing your job. And so it just got worse and worse over a couple week period. And I finally, I went to my commanding officer and I was like, petty officer, something's up. Like I can't see that well. I'm like so thirsty. I'm like starving basically. I feel like I've lost weight. I don't have as much energy. Like what the heck's going on? And he was like, hydrate, and take a day off, because when you're in a tentative command, which a tentative command means that it's not close to DC, it's not in America. So they tend to have like looser rules. They're not so up your butt and around the corner like a regular military installation that would be like inspected by the upper management basically, or the admirals or something. We had one admiral visit when I was there. So they kind of will like give you a day off or something, like that might not happen so much so in a state, base, but when you're overseas, it's a little bit more loose. So he's like, yeah, take a day off, see if you feel better. Didn't feel better, got worse, right? And eventually I went into work. I did my full shift, and I was a police officer, so I was driving around like a cruise control, like a cruise car, and we were just doing basic checks around the base. We worked on the base as military police. I mean, I called us mall cops, but we were military police officers. And so I finally was like, I'm going to the hospital. This is crazy. Because I started really like, what was happening was what I remember is the pillars of my vision were closing in. It was like the world was like closing in. And I couldn't see in my peripheral at all. It was like gone. It was like I was like a horse in blinders. And I just felt like crap. And so I drove to the Navy hospital on the base, and I almost hit the hospital sign, and I parked on the lawn. It was almost like I was like belligerently drunk. When I wasn't, I was stone sober. I just got off of work, and I stumbled somehow into the waiting room, and then I passed out before I even checked in. Right. And, the nice thing about Navy hospitals is it's for the Navy, and the civilians that work there and the family. So it's not like some busy public hospital, you know. So they took pity on me. They brought me back in a gurney, and I actually went into a coma. As I was at the hospital, I started slipping into what they call diabetic coma, and my body just couldn't handle it anymore, basically. And I was starving. I was malnutrition. I had protein in my urine, which is like my protein, you know, breaking down. And they didn't know what was wrong with me at first. You know, they spent a couple hours like doing all these tests, and finally, I wasn't awake for this, but one of the doctors that came on shift, or it was a corpsman, said, "Oh, let's test his blood sugar." So they tested my blood sugar, and the monitor wasn't working. But that wasn't the problem. The monitors, the hand monitors at that time, could only read up to about 500 blood sugar, and I was like like at 1250. And so their little hand checkers looked like they were broken. So they got another one. They're like, "Oh, is this one broken?" And so finally they did a lab scan on me, right? They took my blood, and that took like an hour or two to finish, and they it came back at a 1250. And they're like, this kid's blood's like syrup, basically. I mean, he should be dead, you know. And they had to put me on a slow insulin drip, just because they couldn't inject they couldn't just correct the amount of insulin that I needed to like digest the sugar that was in my body already. And plus, I had drinking like a half a liter of Gatorade before I even walked in there, because I was just drinking Gatorade and water like it was freaking, you know, like it was some kind of the end of the world type of thing. And they slowly brought me down. It took them 2 days to get me back to like a regular blood sugar, but they had to keep me at like the 200-300 range of blood. Normal blood sugar for a human is 100, right? And your body, what you have in your body with your pancreas and your other organs, it regulates that. It doesn't matter. Like if you go eat a cheesecake or something with a lot of sugar in it, you're not going to spike but like a point. Like you'll be 101 maybe if you're lucky, right? Like your body keeps that, like as soon as you start thinking about food, and like, you know how you get hungry? That's because insulin is secreted. You're anticipating a meal. So that's how cool the body is with regulating these type of, you know, systems, you know, for digestion. And so they had to slowly bring me down. It took a couple of days, and then I woke up at about 200. I was at a 200 blood sugar, and I woke up. And I do remember this. It was kind of crazy. It was almost like, I'm trying to think of the movie. Is it Being John Malkovich? You know, where like they have that kind of thing where the guy hijacks the other guy's conscious. You know what I mean? Like there's like the Malkovich that goes inside the Malkovich's.
Yeah, they find a door into John Malkovich, and they start to
mess with him, right? They like take over the wheels. Mm-hmm. It was kind of like that. It was like coming out of a tunnel. I remember it was like there was like a tunnel and like a little bit of light, and then slowly but surely I was kind of coming through it, and oh my God, I'm in a hospital. And that was such a surreal experience. That's probably the best way to describe it. And I'm standing there, and I'm all hooked up to all these machines, and they didn't have to put I was breathing on my own, so that's a good thing. But I had all these machines. I had a thing for, you know, to go potty and stuff, and I had a catheter in my penis, all that stuff. And this lieutenant comes up to me, and he's like, "Hey, welcome back." You know, he's like, "You've been out for, you know, almost 2 days, and I got some bad news for you." He's like, "We've run a bunch of studies while you've been out. We put you on an insulin drip." And I'm like, "What's insulin?" He's like, you know, he had to explain it all to me. I'd never even heard of diabetes, not even type 2 diabetes. I mean, it doesn't run in my family. It's totally foreign to anybody that I know. And he's like, "Yeah, you have a thing called juvenile onset diabetes, and you're completely 100% insulin dependent. And you have to shoot up." They didn't have insulin pumps back then. So he said, "You know, you got to shoot up these different types of insulin throughout the day. We're going to have to train you. It's going to take some time, and we're going to get you, you know, back to your barracks." And like, I just didn't know how to handle. I didn't know what he was talking about. So I wasn't even like scared, or I was just like, what is going on? Because I was so out of it. And then my mom got on the phone, right? They called my mom. And as soon as I heard her voice, that was it. Like somehow it all set in. Like, hey, dude, you got this like disease now that there's no cure for.
Did she explain it to you, or just hearing
She
her
tried
voice?
to. She's like Google searching shit, you know, when they call it.
What was it about her voice that brought it all home?
I think I honestly think that like maybe I thought I did it to myself, you know, because I did like to drink and I was kind of a little rambunctious a-hole, you know, most of my life. And I think there's a part of me that I think was a little ashamed, like you're getting this bad news again about your son, you know, and here I was like doing this kind of like service to the country, and I was, you know, was out there fighting bad guys, I guess, you know.
So you let your mom down, you let your country down.
Yeah, I let everybody down, and then here I am stuck with this fucking chronic illness. And I don't know the first thing about needles. I never liked needles. I was one of those kids when you know you get the shot at the doctor. They would like my old doctor, Dr. Spalding in Millhouse. They would have to strap my arm to the chair because I would like bite and fight. You know, when I was like a 5-year-old getting shots, like I hated needles. So I had this needle phobia.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go through this series of training. They have to train you how to shoot up with like oranges. And I mean, I screwed up so much. Like I would sit there. The first couple of days of being diagnosed with diabetes were probably some of the worst moments of my life by a long shot. I would sit there and cry myself to sleep with a needle in my hand, you know, pinching, like I didn't have a lot of fat then, right? I have a little bit more now. Pinching like a little piece of my fat and just you know just I couldn't put the needle in my skin because I had this like fear of needles going inside of me. It was this weird thing.
It's kind of laughable now, right?
It is laughable now, but I mean I was
so easy.
Yeah, I was
that type of injection.
Yeah. Now I'm like, you know, yeah. I'll like have people shoot me up like, yeah, hit me with that needle, you know. But it took a while for me to get.
How come you've never offered me to shoot you up?
Oh, well, you know that could happen. You never know.
I'm down.
Yeah, I mean, I have Sarah, my daughter, put my CGM, which is it's a little device that monitors where your blood sugar is at every second of the day, and it reads like on a graph where it tells me, okay, you're at this, you know. And so there's this like gun that you put in with a catheter and all that stuff, and I have her push the button, and she thinks it's really cool. So she's my new nurse. So you would have to ask her.
Okay, I'll talk to her.
Yeah, talk to her. But yeah, so that was I mean, obviously, and too, another thing that me and you talk about a lot is alcohol, right? Drugs and alcohol. And alcohol does not mix with diabetes. It just doesn't. It breaks down like a sugar in your body. There's a lot of carbs in alcohol, even hard liquor, right? Even the zero carb stuff still has carbs in it. You know what I mean? And after about 2 weeks of like trying to figure it out and just being sick as a dog, what did I do? I turned to alcohol. You know, I started drinking. I started sneaking because I knew I shouldn't be doing it, right? So I was like, oh, I'm just gonna do hard alcohol, and that was a fucking disaster. I mean, excuse my French, but it was an absolute disaster because for the next year of my life, I would be on this rotating thing of going in and out of hospitals, just absolutely insane. Like I had a death when I got diagnosed with diabetes. I maybe it was my age, you know, my temperament, but I just would not accept it. You know what I mean? Because it's such a weird thing to be like, you're totally fine one day, right? You're totally good, everything's good, your health, you know, all the stuff you take for granted. It's just like you just, you know, oh, go run an 8-minute mile, no problem. Oh, let's go swim out in the ocean, spear fish, cool. You know, just totally everything's good. Eat whatever you want, and then suddenly it's like, no, like you got to be careful. And if you go too far from some place, like you got to make sure you have fresh insulin with you. Like you got to have your needles. You got to have your little. I had this like a little heroin rig system, you know, that like I had to always have my insulin cold. And nowadays with the pump, it's made it a lot easier because I have an insulin pump, and that kind of just it slowly secretes about a unit of insulin an hour. That's what the normal pancreas does. That's why. If a person goes for a certain period of time without eating, like have you ever had that experience where let's say you skip lunch when you're working right? Yeah, I'm just going to work through it, right? And you get to a point where you're really hungry. Well, that's because your body is slowly secreting little tiny bits of insulin, right? In anticipation of eating, right? And you get really, really, really hungry, right? And insulin is one of the enzymes that kind of helps kind of drive you towards that. And so, yeah, man, it was thinking back on that stuff. It was a trip. It was a total trip because here you are one day like you're good. It's like, and then now your arm's missing, or now your leg's missing, or now you're, and it's never going to grow back. It's never going to come back. There's no cure for it. If anything, it gets progressively worse if you don't take care of it.
Now, for some reason, if you were separated from your insulin, if there was a natural disaster, or you got into a shipwreck and you wash ashore on a desert island, you would just be toast?
Yeah, I mean, it would take time. I would slowly go into.
How long would it take? Yes.
It depends on food. It depends on the type of food. But eventually, yes, it would catch me. It could be a couple hours to a couple days.
And you just go into a coma again and just die?
Yeah, that could happen. I think my heart can stop too. That's a possibility. Your brain can, let's say it was an island with a bunch of coconuts or something, and and that's all there was to eat for days, and I had no insulin. That would eventually just catch up with me. My body would not be able to. I would basically die from malnutrition a lot faster than somebody that was starving without any food at all or water.
Mm-hmm. If you had access to every food you wanted, could you sustain yourself on it?
Probably a little longer. Like if I ate like just protein, but the problem is
a little longer is what, years? Or
no.
So even with access to every food there was and understanding of nutrition,
yeah, it doesn't matter.
You'd still be dead.
You'd still yeah, because any amount of carbs or sugar at all affect my blood sugar. If this can had just a little tiny, and I had no insulin to break it down. Now your liver stores glucose in it for emergency. That's for being low. Because I see the thing about type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes has to deal with being high all the time. But when your pancreas is turned, when the lights are off, right? There's nobody home. There's nobody producing insulin in your body. You also have to worry about being low too, right? So if I shoot up too much insulin, I drop. And that's like, I'll drop to the floor, basically. I'll get down to, and I've experienced that several times. Like one time they had to cut one of the car doors of mine. I went on this date down in Orange County. I thought it was pretty cool back then. And took this girl on a date, and we were both sober. And we go out to dinner. I shot up too much insulin. It just happens. And I take her back to my house. We watch a movie, and then I give her a ride home, right? And by the time we were done with the movie, and there was no hanky panky or anything. We just met, so it was not one of those dates. It was kind of like a get to know you date. I start kind of pinballing in the elevator on the way down to the car, right? Like I'm starting to get kind of. So when I get low, and I think you've witnessed this before with me too, I get a little loopy. My memory goes, and if I get really low, I'm almost like a stammering drunk. Like I'll get delusions. I'll see things. Like I've thought like aliens were after me. I've had roommates find me like naked in the corner, like laughing hysterically at nothing, and I don't even remember. Just weird shit like that. And so that's what happens when I get a low blood sugar. Like I have too much insulin, because I shot it up or the insulin pump gave it to me, and I didn't eat enough sugar to counteract that.
I was just thinking, the interesting interview really would be to interview your wife on what it's like to be married to.
Yeah, it's definitely
a type 1 diabetic.
It is.
I'd love to know what she has to say.
There's a lot, I'm sure. Yeah, because the low blood sugars, are more immediately dangerous. Like that's when you get like what I was saying. So I started pinballing in this. Going back to the story with the date, I drive her home, and I'm starting to kind of swerve a little, and so the whole time she thinks I've relapsed on drugs. Like I'm supposed to be sober. I'm supposed to be a sober person, and so is she, right? And she's kind of going, this guy's kind of a screwball. Like he probably popped some pills or he drank while I wasn't paying attention or something. He like snuck something in, and now it's kicking in, and he's like loaded. He's high on something, and I'm never gonna mess with that guy again because I don't want to be around somebody that's a drug addict, right? And I drove home. I don't remember. I dropped down to about a 12 blood sugar. That's what they have on the record with the ambulance. And I T-boned a car going 45 miles an hour.
With her in it?
No, I dropped her off. And my best friend was driving by because we lived in the same. We split this apartment. And he saw my Jeep, and he saw they were cutting. They used this machine to like cut off the door because it was so crunched in, like everything, like the radiator was like almost in my lap, But I didn't get really hurt. I kind of like went with it, like almost like a drunk person. So I had some cuts and scrapes and shit, but nothing bad. But the cars were both totaled. Like it was crazy. Like I literally like hit I was going like this, and I just went at like 40 miles an hour, boom, right into a car, just head on, no brakes, nothing, right? And they thought I was a drunk, right? And lo and behold, I'd been sober for like 5 years, so I haven't touched drugs or alcohol in 5 years, right? So the Casey saw me, they got me out of the car, and he went and parked his car, and he ran over, and they had me in handcuffs, right? Because that's usually what they do. Because I was kind of up, but I was like, I was in that kind of hole that happened when I first was diagnosed, and he was like, no, this guy's a type 1 diabetic, like he needs sugar right now. And I remember they'll give you a shot of glucose. Like I have emergency shots, so if you're ever lucky one day, you might have to give me one, right? And I keep them all over the house, and you have to get new ones because they expire. But it's like the fastest way to bring a diabetic back, having a low blood sugar. And I remember it was almost like a puppet coming back on his strings. You know what I mean? It's like woke up, kind of like, oh, what the fuck happened? I mean, I didn't even know. I didn't even know I was driving. So it can get really scary. Like type 1 diabetics will die immediately on low blood sugars. And it's not your heart. It's because they'll lose conscious, and that maybe they'll be driving or doing something, and then they die from that. And then the high blood sugars, which is like what type 2 diabetics suffer from, is like a slow, that affects the circulation, right? That's like what it was described to me is when you have a high blood sugar and you keep it high for too long of a period of time, it's like taking a butter knife to the inside of a hose. So your veins are an inside of a hose, and the butter knife is your blood rushing through it. And just slowly but surely, it's just cutting away at the line of that, right? And eventually you're going to have all these circulation problems because of it. And so high blood sugars usually are a bad thing long term. That's how you lose your vision, your feet, all that stuff. Heart problems, liver problems.
So is that people lose appendages, limbs, things like that? That's because of circulation issues?
Yeah, usually, yeah. With type 1 diabetes, nerve damage, and that's caused because of the high blood sugars.
Yeah. So it's not because you don't notice the wounds because your feet lose sense, and then they get infected.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Because you get infections, and then your body can't cure those infections by itself, right? Because the circulation's poor, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. And they got to cut it off or amputate. It's something. Sometimes people just lose like a toe or like a finger or something. But I've seen guys that have lost their whole feet, because they refuse. And a lot of it is like somebody refuses to like get better.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. It's
interesting how that happens. In recovery, sometimes people like to talk about, if what you need to do for your recovery is like medicine, you were a diabetic, you would just take your medicine every day.
Right.
But we don't do that in recovery.
Right.
And how weird.
Yeah.
But the truth is that diabetics don't do it either.
Yeah. I mean, even cancer patients don't do it. There is kind of like some bullshit. And I mean, I get the analogy of that. Like it makes perfect sense. Like you get diagnosed, like you would think in a perfect world when the lieutenant told me I have type 1 diabetes, I would be like, yes, sir. What do I need to do? I know I want to keep alive. But it went more inwardly on me. It went like, oh, you got a bad, like I remember I was talking to my mom about this tonight before we came over here, but immediately my mind was like, I just got a bad hand of cards. God just gave me a bad deck. So fuck it. Like, why even keep spinning the wheels? Why don't I just end it? And the funny that, well, it's not funny, but the one thing that I did do is multiple suicide attempts through shooting up too much insulin to try to stop my heart.
Just deliberately.
Yeah. And that happened. I was hospitalized twice for that. And one time Casey, my friend Casey, found me on the floor naked, crawling towards the refrigerator. And I would just load up. I was so like depressed and just all messed up. And
Were you sober at this time? Or
no, high as a kite. This is right before I got sober. And I would load up a huge pool of insulin. Because the thing about insulin, like some bodybuilders use insulin, right? Because they so they can eat a bunch of stuff and like suck it up to their muscles because it's very anabolic. Like it'll bring that nutrient so it can be it can be used in your muscles, right? And it'll hydrate your muscles, So it's an anabolic, almost steroid, really. And that's the way it's been described to me. And so certain bodybuilders that are really trying to put on weight, they'll I've been hit up in gyms like, hey, you want to sell me some of your insulin? But they only need like 1 or 2 units of insulin because it's very dangerous. Like if you were to shoot up insulin, like if I were to go, okay, Chris, let's do an experiment. We're going to make a bunch of pancakes and then I'm going to shoot you up with like 10 units of insulin. You would probably be on the floor. Like you would probably have to go to a hospital because it could kill you, right? That's what I'm playing with every day when I'm shooting a synthetic insulin into my body, right? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's a weird disease. I don't know where I was going with that. What was I talking about before that? It was
you were talking about the difference between high and low.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the date.
Oh, so I purposely, the suicide attempts, I purposely would load up a huge vial of insulin with like 50, 60 units of insulin. I mean, the average, there's not an average, but I probably would take 50 to 60 units of insulin with eating 3 meals a day, an entire day, right? So I'll load up in it like with a lot of insulin and then jab myself. Like in a blackout, like, oh, the world's over. I don't give a fuck anymore. Fuck the world. I'm going to die. Nobody, like what am I going to do? What am I going to add of value? And I did that several times. And the funny thing is when I first got sober and I'd share about it, I used to have this line where I'd say, I was too pussy to try to take my life. Cause I like was afraid that I like tried too many times and it didn't work, Like was I too stupid or something? You know what I mean? But like I had this weird thing where I would lie about committing suicide when I didn't take a gun and put it to my temple, but I did shoot up like.
You'd lie about attempting suicide?
Yeah. I try to like hold it back.
Because you think people would think you're weak because you couldn't get the job done?
I either couldn't get the job done or I was too messed up. Like, wow, like you really did. Like I went through with it, I didn't just sit there going, oh, and then somebody saved me or I called a helpline or something. No, I actually took the vial of insulin and literally tried it into my life. And yeah, it's a kind of a weird thing.
So what's your prognosis? Are you going to live a full happy life or no?
I think it's possible. I've had diabetes now for almost 20 years.
What happens to most people with your condition?
If they eat and exercise regularly and they well, not just eat, but eat, healthy meals and not a bunch of carbs and sugar and crap like that. A lot of processed foods too. I have trouble digesting. But if I do that, I can live a happy life. I definitely can.
But you could. But we're going to live a long life? Are you going to live until you're 76 or whatever the national average is? Or?
I don't know. Like I'm sure there's studies out there about that. I've always been told by endocrinologists, which are the doctors that treat type 1 diabetes, that I can have, like I can be 80 and be a type 1 diabetic. It's all about keeping my blood sugar at 100, like what a regular pancreas would do, as long as I can with no breaks.
But you have major fluctuations, right?
I have major fluctuations.
Even monitoring it, even with the best technology.
Yes. And I a lot of that I think is a mental thing too. There's different things. Like I have a therapist who's a type 1 diabetic, Dr. Mark, and we talk about this a lot. But I do a thing called rage bolusing. You want to hear about that?
Yeah, let's hear it.
So rage bolusing. So bolus is when I take, and I mean we're on a video, so I can show this, right? So I have this insulin pump, right? And you program it for, let's say this drink has 10 carbs. So I put it in 10 carbs, execute, and that's called a bolus. So it gives me an extra amount of insulin to digest that drink. Now that drink doesn't have any, because I usually drink sparkling water because it doesn't have sugar. But let's say it did. So let's say I do that, but let's say let's say I want to have 2 drinks, right? Or I eat something, I have a piece of apple or something, there's something else, like, I want a candy bar or whatever, right? So I do the calculation, and let's say I get it wrong, right? Which does happen, not every day. Most of the time I know how to count carbs and bolus correctly, but let's say I do it wrong, and then I get like a low, or I get really high, right? Actually, a rage bolus is more for really high. So I eat something, I do the bolus, it doesn't work, and I start spiking, right? Like I see on my monitor, there's a graph, and it just 200. You're at 200. Okay, 200 is not that bad. Well, now you're at 215. Then you're at 250, and then now you're above 300, and so maybe you give yourself a little bit more insulin, and it doesn't work because it's a delayed thing, right? Insulin doesn't just like take over right away and just digest the food immediately. It takes like an hour, right? And so what happens with a lot of type 1 diabetics is you get frustrated, and so my blood sugar keeps spiking and spiking and spiking, and I go, well, fuck this! Like I want it to be fixed now. And I'll blast myself with like a much larger amount of insulin than I need. I'll rage bolus.
So you just become impatient.
Yeah, you become impatient, and you do feel sick too. As
so
you're
trying
going
to feel better, and you're also sort of probably frustrated with your
Yeah,
condition.
right? And so you rage bolus, and basically then 3 hours later you're in the black hole. Basically, you plummet because all that insulin finally gets through your system, and it just and then it's this cat and mouse thing. It's like, oh, now I'm dropping, I got to eat something to get it back up, and then sometimes
you overshoot
it, and then you rage bolus again
around,
and you rage bolus again.
It probably has impacts on your body, right? As you're doing that, it's damaging things and affecting you in various ways.
Yeah, so you go in highs and lows, and there's a lot of things that happen, like major depressive disorder. I've been diagnosed with that, and there's in diabetic induced bipolar, right? Because what happens is I get so frustrated doing this dance. Like if I have a bad day, that's what usually when I say I had a bad day with diabetes, it means I probably went up and then down and then up again, and then finally after like 8 hours, I'm finally normal, and I like don't feel like shit completely. But I'll have these like episodes sometimes, where I'll get like kind of manic. I get kind of like, and then I'll get like these lows where I'm like, oh man, it sucks, life sucks, it's over, and it's kind of a weird dragon to ride, you know what I mean? And the other thing I've discovered with older age is I don't recover as fast. So if I do go through one of these episodes, it usually takes me about a half a day to a day to like get back to my normal self, if that's even a thing. So
you really shouldn't eat any extra sugar.
No, I should. I mean, like I can, with an insulin. The nice thing about an insulin pump, like at a birthday party, I can have a piece of cake. I can. I just have to calculate the amount of carbs that are in that cake.
It could be hard, right? If it's a homemade cake or whatever.
Yeah. It gets a little wonky. I use a thing called Calorie King. It's an app. It used to be a little booklet back in the day, and you would you could go to a restaurant and you could see exactly how many carbs, because I count carbs, right? That's what I program into my insulin pump, And once those carbs are calculated in, it'll calculate how many units of insulin I need to
And it's got to
digest
be
that.
an estimate, right? I mean,
Yeah, it can be an
gonna
estimate, and I mean,
depend.
there's other things where I was hospitalized in my 20s, and this is when I was doing really I was really on top of my diabetes. I was like on a keto diet, like no sugar, no, I was just like all into working out and like 8-pack, and I was just really on it, and I went through this thing. I think it's called a honeymoon stage. So basically, every couple years, sometimes your body will just not respond to the insulin you're shooting up, right? So I ended up being hospitalized with like a 750 blood sugar because for 2 days I was just eating healthy. I was eating like rice and chicken, not a lot of rice, very healthy, and I was working, and my blood sugar just wouldn't come down. So regardless of what I did,
insulin or
yeah,
anything.
yeah, and so the thing with insulin pumps is sometimes the catheters get blocked too by little pockets in your body, so you don't even know it's happening, and the next thing you know, you're off to the rate. You're just totally.
Is that what happened? Or
No, that's not what happened. That's happened to me. That happens more often. That just is a thing, right? Catheter gets blocked, the tube gets blocked. You don't notice it, so you go high or low, right? Mostly high when that happens. If it gets blocked, because then you don't get the proper amount of insulin to digest whatever you're eating. But this one was a honeymoon phase. Basically, the body just wasn't responding to the insulin, and so sometimes
what do they do? Change up the insulin? Or?
Yeah, you change up the insulin. There's different types of insulins out there. There's like fast acting. There's like there's a whole bunch of them. There's like these off-label insulins and stuff, but the way that they're made, they're a little different, and so you switch to a different insulin, and then hopefully you can switch back to the insulin you were on. And I was able to do that. That happened one time to me. And then another thing that happens too is with type 1 diabetics is sometimes their bodies, even though like your immune system attacks, the theory is your immune system attacks your pancreas, you become a type 1 diabetic. But your pancreas still kind of works just a little bit, just a tiny, tiny little bit. It's still giving a little bit of insulin, like through whatever, it's not completely dead. And they kind of think that's what happened with me, because when I reached 35, this is when this wonky shit started happening. My pancreas is completely turned off. I'm 100% insulin dependent. That's not going to change. And like I felt the difference. You know what I mean? Like it was like, whoa, what is going on? Because like there's also a thing called insulin sensitivity. Some bodies are more sensitive to insulin, and some are not. Some are less. Like there's insulin resistance.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, it's almost like being like when a drinker drinks over time, they like that 6-pack doesn't get them drunk anymore. It's the same concept, right?
Yeah.
Like your body just tolerates it kind of, and it just doesn't have the effect.
And there's like antibiotic resistances,
Yeah.
right? That are another topic.
Yeah.
But I wondered if there was something like that with insulin.
Yeah. No, it's called insulin resistance. Insulin sensitivity is the route you go. And I've gone through that kind of stuff with it too. And again, all it results in is, at one point, I think when I was 25, they almost considered me a brittle diabetic. A brittle diabetic is like the last stage.
So that's worse than type 1.
You're
really,
going to die, basically.
because the insulin's not working.
Nothing's working. It doesn't matter what you eat. You're just totally
You're just
fucked.
tail spinning.
You're just tail spinning. Mm-hmm. And I kind of went into that for a little bit. And I think it was an insulin thing.
And so that could just happen to you, like in 5 years, something could kind of whatever, and then you just get sicker, and they try to figure it out, and they switch insulins, and
yeah, I mean,
you've got that anvil hanging over your head.
I think that is, it's a possibility. I mean, it's funny when you look. I've looked up the history of type 1 diabetes, and what they used to call it in the medieval times was the sugar sickness. Mm-hmm. And when somebody would get the sugar sickness, they would go mad and die. Right. And that's kind of, I can relate to that, because when my blood sugar goes above a 200, 250, and I get up into the 400 or 500s, I go a little mad. Like I lose it. Like I get really, really frustrated. I can't think straight.
How often does this happen?
I mean, it's been happening a lot more in recent time, like in the last couple of months. Like,
why are you getting a little more brittle?
Maybe a little bit more brittle. Yeah. But
how do you feel about getting teased about your diabetes? Just bother you?
No, it doesn't bother me. It's funny because I think I've made such a joke. Maybe that's how I've dealt with it, is I make jokes about it. You know, like I have a thing where I use the diabetic card. I have that. I kind of invented that. So like I'll cut in the front of line. You know what I mean? Like I'll get served first, you know, because I'll use the diabetes card.
If you're out to eat.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Or like there's a buffet.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, I'm a type 1 diabetic. Like and I'll do that to friends, you know, on purpose. And it's like funny, but like I still get the privilege, you know, because I am considered disabled, right? So it's pretty like, so I like to poke fun at it, you know, because like if I don't, I'll just be miserable, you know? But yeah, I think it's kind of funny. I mean, the one thing that and this is for all, if there's any type 1 diabetics listening to this, like the one thing it took me years to kind of come to terms with was everybody's always worried about what the fuck JD's eating. Oh, you're diabetic.
If you eat something, people are looking at you. Are you sure you should?
Yeah, you come over and, you know,
asking you, hey, JD, what,
yeah, like,
you know, it's okay.
Yeah. And then, or they'll be like, oh, I baked this pumpkin pie, but it's a sugar-free pumpkin pie, you know? And like, that's like my mom. I'm just channeling my mom there. And I mean, God bless her for that, because I know she's going to watch this. But that, like, she doesn't do, it's crazy. She doesn't do that as much anymore, really. She's actually more of a keto eater anyways. Like, it's like everybody has to kind of adapt with you in a weird way. Like, if we go out to In-N-Out, I'm going to get a protein wrap. And like, it's funny because if I go out with a group of people, or if I even went out with you, like you will feel kind of weird. Like, oh man, I'm kind of fucking up here. I'm eating all this bread and shit. You know what I mean? Like, maybe not, but a lot of times, you know what I mean? It'll bounce in your head and like, damn, he's like eating real healthy, you know, even though we're out at a fast food restaurant, he's still eating healthy, you know? So it kind of messes with people. It's funny. Yeah.
And Claire's a vegetarian.
Yeah.
And I see the influence that has on me.
Yeah, you can't help it, right? Like Shireen is, you know, my wife. She's like pretty much 100% keto. Like what? Like, because I can't eat all that crap. I can't eat a bunch of pasta and starch and potatoes and shit. My body it doesn't work. I mean, like the insulin can help, but it just it slows things down too much too.
So I think I was asking you how often you were talking about getting up into the 300, 400, 500 range, and you said it's happening more often lately.
Yeah, a couple, probably once or twice a week.
And what kind of impact does that have on your wife or your daughter?
It makes me really angry and short tempered, and yeah, it was a lot worse. I want to say about a year and a half ago. I think I was going through something. I mean, it could have been a brittle thing. You know, you never know when this shit comes. That's the thing. There's no writing on the wall like, hey, yeah, you're starting to get a little wanky here. No, it'll hit you all of a sudden. And I think that's the one thing that it still surprises me sometimes, because I think my mind tries to just put it away and go, oh yeah, you got the insulin pump now, you're good, like you're like a normal person, but I'm not. And so I'll get caught into that rut, and then the next thing you know, 350 comes, and it's, you know, 8 a.m, and I'm waking up, and I got a 5-year-old trying to get me up, and like, you know, wants to like play, and like she loves me, you know, and I'm just like, get the fuck away from me, basically, and it's not cool. And I know that my.
And then you feel bad about that?
Oh yeah, totally like.
Do you ever try to explain to her?
Yeah, but once it's happened a couple times, it's like hard to, you know what I mean? It's almost like the difference between saying I'm sorry and making an amends. You know what I mean? Like an amends would be like I'm going to correct this sugar problem permanently, you know, or like
but you can't.
But I can't completely.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's a weird place to be. It can make a lot of people not want to be around me. You know what I mean? Like close living stuff, because I can get really irritable.
Has it been a point of contention in your marriage?
Yes, it definitely has. I think it stresses. Well, the thing that you know my wife says about it is she just wants me to be happy. You know, she just wants me to be well. It's not even happy. She just wants me to like.
All right. So after some brief technical difficulties, we're back. And I had a question for you.
Yeah.
If you could have your diabetes cured and resolved and removed from your life for good forever, how much would you pay to have that happen?
Uh, I'd pay anything, actually. I mean, if I had the money and I could, let's say I could afford it.
Every cent in your bank account
Absolutely.
with your family?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah. If there was an opportunity to get rid of this disease.
Mortgage your house?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think without a doubt I would.
Why?
Just because it's one of those things that just it kind of gnaws on you every day. It's almost I've thought about this before, but it's almost unnatural to have all this equipment to keep me alive. You know, like we were talking previously, like when people would die from this disease, you kind of lose your mind a little bit. You go, and then you go into a coma. Your body starts digesting itself. It's almost like without technology, I wouldn't be here. And that's actually like absolute fact, So a cure would be amazing. I mean, they are working on cures. And really they have to do, I think some of the most exciting stuff is the stem cells, where they regrow a pancreas, right? And the magic to the cure, I think what it's going to come down to with type 1 diabetes is finding the right drug that holds your immune system just at bay enough for your pancreas to regenerate itself through stem cells or whatever technology, whatever technology makes your pancreas come back online. Because the ultimate issue is my immune system goes, no, like you're an antibody almost, right? It almost recognizes it as that, and it kills it. So there have been, like, I think 1 or 2 actually clinical cases where somebody's been cured of type 1 diabetes.
Does it make you feel like you're just a bad egg?
Yeah.
Like you're the runt of a litter that just should be taken out to pasture.
Yeah.
And if nature took its course, you would have,
It's kind of like Lassie, right? They take Lassie behind the woodshed after she gets rabies because there's no cure. Boom, put one in, back of the head and be done with it. Now ask that family, hey, if there's a magic shot and you had to like sell your farm to save Lassie, maybe they would,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they wouldn't, but I'm more on the fence that like, yeah, I would definitely. I
think a lot of people, at least I have had the maybe misconception before that it's a very manageable disease. You just, you got your insulin as long as you watch what you eat, as long as you do this, you do that, then you just get to live basically a normal life. My guess is that that's not true based on what you're telling me now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you experienced this earlier in the evening. We were together, and I was showing you the graph on my pump, and there's nothing I can do about it, And it's not that I ate something that I shouldn't have eaten. I had a piece of pizza, and I shot up what they call a table bolus, where it gives you a big injection of insulin to handle the carbs in a piece of pizza. But I only had one piece of pizza. It's not like I gorged myself and like ate a bunch of sugar and crap, right? I had a starchy piece of pizza. It was left over in my house, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll have that for kind of my dinner tonight."
What would have happened if you hadn't had that piece of pizza?
I would have gone low, and I would have had to eat something. Otherwise, I would have been a gibberish.
So it wasn't that was the mistake, and had you just not had the piece of pizza, then you would have been just smooth sailing.
Yeah, and another misconception I think about T1D versus, type 2 diabetes, which is the more common one, is that it doesn't, like, it obviously eating healthy and trying to not have as much starch and sugar in your diet is very important for overall your blood sugars. But wow, I'm starting to go low. I can feel it. My brain's not working. But even when I eat something healthy, my blood sugar goes up. Even when I am injecting insulin, the average swing is 250, almost 300. Like most type 1 diabetics will swing up to that, like think of like a bell curve graph. You swing up to it, and then you kind of either flatten off or you drop back down and flatten off.
So there's no medical science that can allow someone to just stay at 100.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that can do it. I've heard of people that can do it, but it's not. That's not. It's extremely difficult. Let's just put it that way. Mm-hmm. Like you would have to just make your whole life about like.
You have to be like a bodybuilder where you're just so disciplined.
Yeah, everything like exactly.
Routine.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to do.
It's almost because the thing about even what they call it fast acting insulin.
So you'd have to work as hard as a competitive bodybuilder just to experience what most people experience just by default.
Yeah, just taking a shit at the bathroom. You know what I mean? Just having a normal walk in the park. And I have had those experiences. That's the interesting thing.
And that's even with intervention from modern medical science.
Yes.
The best intervention medicine has to provide. You'd still have to be as disciplined as a bodybuilder to experience the type of stability, physiological stability that I experience just by just doing whatever I want.
Right. And there are a lot of type 1 diabetics that can probably do it better than I've been doing it. I mean, I've had the disease for 20 years, and I have experienced that kind of steadiness, and it was in my early 20s. And it was a couple years after I got, and I was working out, I was eating, it was like a regiment that I had. They called me a supplementologist, which was kind of a joke, right? Like I had all these different supplements and proteins, and literally every minute of every day, I was like, oh, I got to eat this snack. And I would even shoot up insulin an hour before I would eat. So the fast acting was kicking in by then. Right. And so then I would have the meal, and then it would
then
counteract.
Even then, right, things would get.
Well, even then, it's not a matter of are you going to have a lot like, oh, you should prevent. That's one of the more frustrating things is people.
It's got to be that more frustrating too. The more careful you are, and then things still get off kilter.
Still, things get, and that also has to do with over long periods of time. Your reaction, we talked about it earlier, but like the tolerance, your insulin.
What was the name of the
insulin sensibility? Mm-hmm. How sensitive you are.
Insulin resistant.
Insulin resistance. Those are
fragile. Was that the term you used?
No. I'm trying to think, but it's.
What do you call it? Brittle.
No? Brittle diabetes. And I've experienced that too, where it doesn't matter how much insulin I'm taking, how healthy I'm eating. My diabetes is all over the place. Mm-hmm. That's not the case now. But yeah, so that's why endocrinologists, like my doctors, give you the average person is at 100 24/7. Doesn't matter if you have ice cream or vegetables, you're going to be at the same blood sugar. But with a type 1 diabetic, they give you a bigger window to live by. It's like, okay, if you go up to like a 250 for a couple hours, that's normal. That's what they call it. It's that's acceptable. It's acceptable in the medical industry. So they've had to kind of like.
But earlier you were like pushing 400, right?
Yeah, earlier like a couple hours ago I was at 400, and I had shot up the perfect amount of insulin.
You've done everything by the book.
By the book.
Didn't do anything your doctor would have said you couldn't do.
And now right now what you're witnessing on camera is I'm crashing back down to normal. But it feels like a crash.
Right now, if you checked, would you be still above normal? But because it's
way above normal, I'd probably be at like 250.
But because it's sinking, it
feels like I'm sinking into the floor right now. Uh-huh. Right.
So how does that feel? You feel fatigued?
Yeah. Like I had a nasty headache at 350, 400. What you witnessed me at, and now the headache's starting to go away, and there actually is a little bit of a euphoric feeling. Like I kind of feel like, I'm like feeling better. I'm feeling like I'm good, but it's also mixed with I don't feel that good. It's a weird thing to describe. Like I still have a headache. I still feel a little weak. I'm still a little bit more irritable, right? But I feel better than I did.
How often do you feel like this?
I mean, it could be
every day,
every other day. Yeah,
multiple times a day.
Yeah, I mean, if I don't eat pizza. Basically, like if I don't eat pizza and I just go like full crazy keto, it wouldn't be as extreme.
You were just trying to go crazy keto recently, right?
Yeah, no, I did it. I did it for 30 or 40 days.
And was it helpful?
Yeah, it definitely is.
And why'd you stop?
just to take a break so I could have some, eat some normal stuff like, oh, I want a piece of pizza once in a while, whatever. And usually during the holidays, it's hard to go real hardcore keto because, you go over to these family events. I don't want to be that a-hole that is like, oh, well, I can't eat this, but I can't eat that, tip tap, around, when I might as well just give myself the proper amount of insulin and just eat the meal. And usually around these times, I'll pre-shoot up insulin. Like I'll know, okay, I'm about to have like a big feast.
No matter how well you pre-shoot up, if you eat like a Thanksgiving meal, no holds bar, are you going to get
Oh yeah, a good example
messed up by it?
So as far as the frequency, I went to a birthday party for my my stepdad, Roger, who's been married to my mom for I think 15 years. And we had this really nice outing at the Landing, right? And you would look at the table and not say, "Hey, this is like super unhealthy food," because it's not. The restaurant doesn't tend to sell just ice cream and
processed food. Or
processed food. I mean, it's all very nice. It's a nice restaurant, and but there's pastries, there's crab cakes, there's a full course meal you get. Now, I indulged. I said, you know what? I'm going to shoot up. I'm going to count the carbs out. I needed this amount of insulin. Not to bore you with the details, right? Because there's a little calculation you do to count your carbs. And I shot up the insulin on my way there, right? Nobody knows I'm doing that, but I know because I'm kind of pre-gaming. I'm pre-gaming, right? Because I know I'm going to have a little fun, have a nice, there might be a little scoop of ice cream at the end. It's a birthday party, right? There might be even. And when I eat cake, I only eat a little bit. Sometimes I won't eat the whole thing because it'll be guaranteed I'm screwed in like an hour. It doesn't matter how much insulin
just because cake is so sugary.
It's so sugary, and it's just like that direct sugar that just you just spike. So I did all that, and I got sick as a dog. Sick as a dog to the point, and
I leave the party.
No, but my part was I probably ate too much, but I was hungry.
When you say sick as a dog, what does that look like? You're at the party, but you just can't participate at all because you're so
I'm just kind of like I recede inward. I kind of just become kind of.
Do you get irritable?
Yeah, I can. It just depends on what stage of the high that I'm in, right? Like what you witnessed tonight. I feel like knowing where I'm at helps me not be as much as irritable sometimes when I don't look at the graph and I'm just there and I don't
probably start to obsess over it, right?
And that's another major, I think.
What's better, to look at the graph or not?
I've gone through both. Yeah. I can't really.
It's like when you're trying to watch your weight one way or another, and you just every day check the scale. It can be kind of deceptive. Right?
Yeah, and well, when this new technology came out from Dexcom, which God bless that company because it's got a real time monitor where you're at. I went through a period of time, couple months period, where I was literally like I was freaking out over the pump. Like I'd never had the ability to see where I am in real time, and that was kind of a relief because you would only check 3-4 times a day. You prick your finger and you do a little finger check, and just like they would do at the hospital.
Now you can check it.
Now it's just checked. I don't ever need to do that. Right?
How often does it sample your blood sugar?
I think it's every couple of seconds or once.
Really?
Yeah, that's why it's a real time graph. It's not really. There still is a slight delay, right? It's not
constant, obviously.
It's not perfect, right? That's the best way to pray. It's not perfect, but like when I look at my insulin pump now, well, it's not going to tell me anything now because I just changed my CGM, so it's gonna be.
What's a CGM?
CGM is a continuous glucose monitor. That's what they call it. That's what it's you can call it a turtle, whatever you want, but it basically is always getting a sample of your blood. And then it's wirelessly telling.
So it takes a little bit while to get back online.
Right. And what's funny is that we just did that whole thing where I put this CGM on my stomach and it's supposed to be warming up.
Well, you didn't.
Well, yeah, my daughter did. Yeah.
How old's your daughter?
5.
Okay.
Yeah. So she likes to do that little button press. It's kind of fun for her. And plus, selfishly, I just want her to know my diabetes because one day when I'm an old man, if I make it there, I'll be like, "Yo, kid, take care of this shit or help me." But
That's right. You're training her.
I'm training her. I'm training her to help me with this plight of mine.
When you become sick and decrepit,
Yeah.
in the hopefully not too soon future.
Right. So this thing just malfunctioned on me. But that's just an example. This is the best insulin pump on the market. There's nothing better. You pay top dollar for it. Top dollar CGM, which is, the continuous glucose monitor. And I just pulled this out of my pocket and it was saying, "Oh, not loading. It's all messed up. You have to redo it, that whole thing."
So what she did, you got to like throw that thing away.
Throw it away, rip it off
Pull
your
it out,
belly.
read.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, that's the one thing. Like, I don't know if there's a perfect. Maybe I think this is the path to where they will get diabetes perfect.
If you had this option to pay a certain dollar amount to have your diabetes cured, you said you would completely wipe your bank account out. Start fresh. No question.
No question.
What if
I would even sell my crypto for it?
What if I asked your wife? Would she?
I think she would say the same thing.
Yeah,
she would be like, yeah, I think it's
because she just loves you so much.
Well, I just think that it's a plight, it's almost like alcoholism, right? It doesn't just affect me. It affects everybody I'm around. It's just a reality. She's dealt with, I've been with her for almost 9 years. And she's seen it all. She's seen the highs, the lows, the irritation,
How severely do you think it's compromised your marriage?
I think
it threatened your marriage.
Oh, hugely. I mean, obviously, I can't just go, "Oh, it's just the diabetes that's doing that." But it's
not just like, hey, it might be contributing. It's a major contributing factor.
It's a major contributor. It's a major causal factor to fights. And
do you think anyone who's struggling with the disease, such as you are, is having relationship issues, whether it's in a primary
let's put it this way, I've only met a sample size of type 1 diabetics. I've met a couple. I've actually sponsored some guys and tried to help them. Every single type 1 diabetic I've ever met has relationship problems, whether they're as extreme as what I've had or less extreme, whatever. They've all had
more extreme, I'm sure.
Yeah, more extreme. You could fill in the blank. Like every single type 1 diabetic I've ever met has major to severe relationship problems.
So I guess I have 2 more questions for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
One, we've talked about a lot of things, but what is the worst part about having type 1 diabetes?
I think the worst part for me is not feeling like I am normal. Right, like you know what I mean. Like, I think the insidious thing about this
psychologically is the worst part, more than physically.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's more of a psychological trip, right? I also had a period of my life that I'm forgetting where I didn't have type 1 diabetes. So my mind will go back to that, like, oh yeah, remember when? Like you didn't have to have all this crap and deal with all this crap and the highs and lows and, oh no, are you driving? Is it okay that you're driving? Or not okay? All this stuff. And but I'm starting to, I've had diabetes longer now than I haven't. But I still had that period of life where, and I've heard that from other type 1 diabetics, that the ones that have gotten it younger, they do a little bit better, right? Because they just don't have a memory of ever having this problem. But if you're born into the world around you, right? This is a philosophical experiment now. If that's all you've ever known and that's all you'll ever know, you tend to deal with it a lot better.
Yeah, it's like losing a parent really young, or not having a father at all, or something like that.
Yeah.
Compared to
having it, right?
Losing it,
or even like phantom limb, right? Like there's when you get your arm cut off, people still feel it and they think they're grabbing something.
Are some people born with type 1 diabetes?
I don't know the answer to that. I think it depends. I think there are defects that can just immediately they come out and they're a type 1 diabetic, but for the most part, it's very juvenile. It's like, there's kids that, are 1, 2, but they just don't have a memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3 years old.
So the second question, what's the best part about having type 1 diabetes?
Front of the line card pass. That's definitely like, that's a perk. I think exploring it through therapy, through cognitive, behavioral therapy, in very deep detail, I get, how to explain this? I get a justification to have mental problems. And I know that.
So you get a free pass.
Get a free pass.
I don't know if you identify with this, and this person probably wouldn't have either if I had asked them, but I play music. I've played music throughout a lot of my life, and the band that I was in that was the most successful, the kind of creative mind behind the whole group had cystic fibrosis, which is a congenital disease. It's really tragic. He died when he was 24 years old. When he was in middle school, he got so sick that he had to have several of the lobes in his lungs transplanted. And he spent, I think, a year or so in the hospital. He was also diabetic. It was also it was a result of this. I think there's a lot of factors to having cystic fibrosis. But he was diabetic. He had to watch what he ate. He was always underweight. He was in the hospital every year for periods of time with, life-threatening health scares. But he was such a creative person, and he was a fascinating person. And I always felt like there must be, this is like denial of death stuff, right?
Yeah.
We all are somewhat aware that we are mortal, that our lives are finite, that things will progressively, if we're lucky, get slowly worse and will become less functional. But some people get a real up close and personal glimpse into their own mortality. And I just imagine that there must be some benefit to that. There must be some benefit, and maybe that's just a silver lining we cast over things in order to make it more digestible. But someone like you, having had the experiences you've had, compared to someone like me who hasn't had those experiences in the same way, you've already really knocked on the doors
of death. Yeah.
In a way that a lot of other people haven't.
I think you're right about. I don't think it's just a silver lining that we gloss over it to make it. I do believe like there's experiences I've had in my life where I'll just jump off the cliff, where a normal person would be like, I'm not going to jump off the cliff.
I did have not to cut you off as you were just answering, but I don't have type 1 diabetes. I have nothing like that. But anyone, I mean, it's just, we're all basically here because of technology,
Yeah.
to one degree or another. I don't know if I would be alive, but I don't know if we would be here collectively. But I had a really bad heart arrhythmia 4 or 5 years ago, where I was just at the gym and I was on the treadmill and I kind of didn't feel right. And I had to get off. I actually had to push, for the first time in my life, I had to push like the emergency stop button, like you always wonder why that's there.
Yeah, that's why.
I actually had to push it. I'm like, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And then quickly got to the point where I had to push it. I tried to catch my breath and I couldn't catch my breath. And I was at Planet Fitness in downtown LA. And I got to the point where I laid on the floor and I was drenched in sweat and I couldn't catch my breath. And I felt like I was dying. And I remember I started to recover a little bit, and I wrote a note in my phone, like on the note app. And it was really me just reflecting on this experience I had had where I felt something that I imagined was like the panic of really dying, like when that mouse, when your cat caught that mouse and was playing with it before it gave it the final death blow. That feeling of like actively, traumatically dying. I felt like I had a little glimpse into it. And then my inner artist or philosopher, I felt like I had to write it down.
Right.
And then it started again. I had to put my phone down. And it got to the point where I was like, I didn't know what to do. I was like squirming on the floor. And fortunately, someone from the gym came up to me and he said, "Hey, are you okay?" And I just said no. You know. But anyway, one thing led to another, and I got to the emergency room, and by the time I got there, all my limbs were completely numb, and I was minimally conscious, and I had a resting heart rate of 250 beats per minute, and this was like an hour and a half after I got off the treadmill. So my heart, your heart is run by an electrical, system.
Whole system, yeah.
And somehow that just got messed up. And it got like tripped out, and I couldn't regulate. The way you can't regulate your glucose,
yeah,
my heart couldn't regulate my heart rhythm.
Right.
And it was just spinning.
Yeah.
And they had to do the whole paddles. They had to like put me out, and I woke up in the hospital, and I was there for a couple days, and they ultimately don't know what happened. They don't know. They sent me to a electrophysiologist. That could go into the story, would be longer. To keep it somewhat succinct, at the end of the day, it's a mystery what that was all about. And I was left with the prescription of like, keep an eye on it. But I remember it left me, but for a while, it was so nice to have, because I tend to get spun out about things in life, that it's one of those things that it's hard to really ask yourself, if I was going to die tomorrow, how much would I care about what I have to do right now? Mm-hmm. The things that we are so afraid of, the things that we're so nervous about, really in the grand scheme of things, I lose sight of what's precious and what matters, and get fixated and hung up on things that by a lot of measures really don't. But there was something about being in like having that near-death experience in my rearview mirror, that for a while I could recall that. You're probably at a different stage, because for me it was extreme, and it was mysterious, and I dodged a bullet, and then I felt okay. Whereas for you, it's a slog. You're trudging day in, day out.
But those kind of things do happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I've experienced that kind of stuff.
But just to finish the loop, for a while, I could really, as I was starting to go down that road of like getting spun out about something that was minuscule and unimportant,
right?
I had in my back pocket, I could just go, bro,
it's all good. Yeah.
You're. And the other thing that was cool about it is I really felt like if that had been it, I would have been cool.
Yeah.
I was stoked that it wasn't, but it gave me a little bit of a preview into what dying could be like. And I went like, okay, I could, by the time it was getting so bad that, like for that mouse, it seemed so tragic for that mouse to be in your cat's mouth and being toyed with and being completely powerless.
Yeah.
But by the time I was, when you're really powerless, it's like
you give up.
You give up.
Yeah.
You give up. And I was it surrendered,
Yeah, it definitely, and I mean, I think, maybe plug it into that story. That is probably why I eventually surrendered to a power greater than myself, God, whatever you want to call it, creative intelligence of the universe.
Yeah, the role that this played in your particular spiritual unfolding is probably a significant one.
Yeah.
And it's also probably played a significant role in some of the difficulties in your marriage, in your family relationships, in all of your relationships.
Yes. Yeah.
But also, it's probably, what would life have been like without it?
Right.
You wouldn't have gotten here.
No, I definitely wouldn't.
Drinking would have not been, you wouldn't have had the impetus to stop drinking.
No, absolutely not.
When you did, or if you did, if you would have at all, who knows?
Right. Yeah, it's and it's there are things, going back to your second question. It has helped me in a lot of ways, because I was able to see death at a very young age, and maybe not conquer it. Conquer it wouldn't be the. Maybe at times I have, though. You know what I mean?
You got a second lease on life.
Yeah.
That time when you woke up in the hospital when you were in the military.
Yeah.
You would have been done.
Yeah. Yeah, I would have been done.
And here you are.
And here I am.
What are you going to do with it?
Right, exactly. And what have I done with it too? And I think it's given me that second opportunity. And there is, I think with that type of death, there is an ego death with that too, because when you die, you know, and it's weird to die. It's a weird sensation. It really is, because prior to this, prior to the diagnosis of diabetes and being in a coma, I did have, and we never talked about this, but I had spinal meningitis when I was a kid. Right, and spinal meningitis,
serious business.
It's a serious disease, and I was in Children's Hospital in Los Angeles.
It's like a brain infection, right?
Yeah, it's an infection. There's two. There's bacterial meningitis, and there's spinal, and they're both spinal meningitis, and there's viral meningitis. I can't recall which one I actually had, but I did have the one that kills kids, basically, right? And yeah, I was in Children's Hospital. I was 1 year old, so I don't have like I don't have. I probably have some kind of situational awareness, but I don't have like a cognitive awareness of it. But I was at Children's Hospital for a month or so, or a couple weeks, and my veins were collapsing because I had baby veins, and I should be dead. I should be dead from that, you know. And then I tie that into the diabetes, though. Whether it helped set me up to cause it or not, who cares? It doesn't matter, because it's happening now. But yeah, I've walked through death multiple times, I guess you could say, and here I am.
When I was a kid, I was so dehydrated that my parents couldn't control it, and I had to spend a week in the hospital where they had to, you know. But you just think about like 200 years ago, how many children died, you know?
Oh yeah,
at a young age.
Yeah.
People would just have 10 kids because they knew they were going to lose 5 before they grew up to something like this or something like that.
Yeah.
We at my work we celebrate birthdays for employees. You know, it's a little quick cake, happy birthday. And at my place of work, we recognize belly button birthdays and sobriety birthdays. And after someone receives a birthday cake, it's customary for the group of people who are watching to say like speech, you know, some form of just like look, and something needs to be said.
Right.
And when it's a sobriety birthday, people, you know, are able to say a few things. But almost every time for the belly button birthday, people say, well, I didn't die.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But they say it like, I didn't do anything to earn this.
Right.
But it's surviving isn't that simple, and it's not that easy.
Right. No, of course.
Period.
Yeah. Period.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I there is a part of me, like I've recognized this over the years, that it's my blessing and my curse, right? It's a curse blessing, or a blessing curse, because I wouldn't have been able to have the life that I've had if I didn't come to face terms with, you know, the things that it forced me to face terms with. I wouldn't have been able to get sober at 20 years old and keep sober. You know, that I don't think that would even have been, that would have been impossible.
Well, I do have some bad news, which is that even though your blood sugar is crashing, and even though I've given it everything I have, I have failed to make you cry.
I know.
Which was my intention.
I know.
This evening.
It's hard.
You're just
I'm a fucking oak. Yeah. But you are too. I feel like when we did it with you, maybe if we would have done it shortly, or a little shorter after your dad's death, you would have been probably. You would have been probably.
That would have been. I mean, that would have been interesting.
Yeah, that would have been. Well, that would have probably never happened. But you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's no way you could have gotten me out.
Yeah,
here.
I mean, and it's not that I don't cry about things. You know, I feel like the things that I cry about now are like animal deaths or something. You know what I mean? Something like that. You know, like that kind of stuff. Yeah. So we'll have to revisit a conversation when there's a couple animals in my life that are, you know, they're not close. But you know, and another thing, just to maybe we'll end it here, but there is a podcast that made me cry listening to it, and it was a Joe Rogan podcast, and I can't remember
the guest, huh? The guest. And it made you cry.
Oh, it was the guy who does all the funny movies. Smith is his last name. He's
Kevin Smith?
Kevin Smith. Jay and Silent Bob, right?
Yes.
He's Silent Bob.
Correct.
Right. So it was Kevin Smith and Joe Rogan. It's an old podcast, but it's kind of a classic. People refer to it. But they start talking about dogs dying. And man,
Started to think about your pups.
yeah.
Gotcha.
But you just start thinking, I mean, I've had other dogs die on me too when I was a kid and everything, but
I feel it. Your dogs aren't even my dogs, and just sitting out there in the living room and seeing, their old bodies laying there on the hardwood floor.
Yeah. It gets to you.
so
It gets to you.
sad.
And I don't know why. We only cry. I've only cried about things like in the moment, like something is gnarly, like, what Peterson says, like the floor comes from
I
underneath
really
me and
feel it. Even with my cats,
yeah.
I just think like, I don't know. I really feel like I don't know if I can make it. Losing a cat, with its IQ of 14 or whatever.
There's just something about
It's
them,
like it could,
right?
it could be a life-ending experience.
Right. It
Life-altering.
Yes. Yeah. So maybe one day we'll dive into that. We'll do the denial death
We will.
stuff. Yeah.
Next whichever one of us loses an animal next, I'm going to try to fire up these mics as soon as we can.
As soon as we can, and talk about the experience of that, and not as like
totally
I
traumatize
got you, but
ourselves.
like it is something that I think a lot of people go through, and it does tie into having chronic illnesses. Because do you think I wasn't crying like a little baby for a long time dealing with this shit? Yeah, I mean it's a gnarly, debilitating thing, but yeah, I mean you get to a point where you deal with it, and it's not that I put it to this. See, the thing about type 1 diabetes, maybe we'll end on this. Type 1 diabetes, you can't just ignore. It will kill you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's like alcoholism.
Just to have something in your life that you can't ignore is such a burden.
Yeah,
Unless it's something really good.
yeah. Unless it's like the upper echelon or the opposite.
But something you just have to think of every day, every hour of every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll end on that.
All right.
Don't deny death.
Unless you can.
Unless you can.
Then God bless. Our hats are off to you.
Yeah.